You're listening to the Internet's #1 podcast among people still using AOL dial-up. It's Paperback Warrior.
Welcome back to the last episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast for the month of March. My name is Eric. I'm here with my co-host Tom. We have a website at paperbackwarrior.com where we review vintage fiction books in the hardboiled crime, men's adventure, espionage, and Western genres every day, sometimes even twice per day. If you're listening now, you've probably figured out that we also do a weekly podcast where we talk about old books. Check out the website or your favorite podcast app to listen to archive shows. Let me introduce my co-host, Tom, who's going to tell us about what we have on today's show.
Well, before we do that, Eric, I just want to double-check with everything happening in the news with the plague. How are you and your family doing? Everybody healthy?
All very healthy. Doing really well.
Good.
Thankfully.
And we're here, and same here. And so we're here in the recording studio together with a proper social distance between us.
Yes.
But if you start coughing, I'm running in the other direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want any handshakes, no clapping.
I think you and I are very similar, that we have very lovely and sociable wives and children, but all things being equal, you and I are very comfortable with the idea of spending an afternoon home alone reading a book on our porch or whatnot. So the idea of social distancing isn't really awful for me when I consider it and think like, wow, wouldn't it be kind of nice to be able to sit around and read a book all day? What do you think?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not a social guy. I'd rather just sit in my house and read all day, every day. I don't need to go out and about. I'm just that way.
I can't believe you just got married. You were quite a catch, man.
Hey, that was part of the deal. Like she had to understand this.
And so my mind, as everything's been talking about, this plague that's going on, which I think we should start calling Captain Trips, just on general principle from Stephen King's The Stand. I have been thinking about books though in our various genres that involve pandemics or germ warfare. Can you think of any off the dome?
The book that comes to mind, Tom, is Robert McCammon's Swan Song. Did you ever read that?
Oh, that was great. That was great. It was sort of like his version of The Stand.
Yeah, it was.
But it was great. I thought it was, instead of it just being a cheap knockoff, it was a fantastic book unto itself.
It really is. There's another one called Blood Crazy by Simon Clark. I know listeners have probably heard me talk about this guy before. He's a fantastic horror author. But that's a really good virus-oriented type of book. And Joe Hill just put out a sort of a virus kind of book. I think it was Fire or something or another. Have you read Joe Hill before?
I have read short stories by him. Okay. I got a short story collection that was given to me at Fantastic Fest of a ton of his short stories when they premiered the In the Tall Grass movie.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I got a couple to share with you. One is from the year 1998. It's called The Cobra Event by Richard Preston. Now, Richard Preston wrote a nonfiction book that was a bestseller called The Hot Zone about kind of a pandemic plague. Just a nonfiction book about the risk. I think it was Ebola, actually. And he turned a lot of the concepts from that into a really fantastic thriller called Cobra Event. My wife pointed out when we were talking about it that Ian Fleming's In Her Majesty's Secret Service is basically a plot where James Bond learns that his enemy Blofeld has been curing a group of young British and Irish women of their livestock and food allergies, but in truth, he and his aide have been brainwashing them into carrying biological warfare agents back to Britain and Ireland to destroy the agricultural economy. So that's a James Bond one by Ian Fleming. I got Matt Helm's The Devastators, which is basically Matt Helm goes to northern Scotland to the desolate moors to go after a crazed scientific genius who is basically creating a new version of the bubonic plague. There was a book called The Arab Plague it was a Nick Carter book. Don't know much about that one. We have King Kung Fu No. 5, Red Plague in Bolivia by Marshall Macau. I'm not sure if the Red Plague is a literal plague in that one or if it's just the idea of communists being a plague.
Right.
And then we have the classic The Spy with the Blue Kazoo by Dagmar, which is about a plague that gives people orgasms.
Oh.
Which is also the plot of The Baroness No. 1. What's interesting about this is Dagmar was like a game show hostess contestant type back in the 1960s. This book was actually written by Lou Cameron.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was.
Boy, he got around.
Yeah, she was just sort of like a Kim Kardashian of her era, basically, like a beautiful, sexy woman who really didn't do much for a living other than be a guest star on stuff.
Makes sense.
Anyway, so that's your plague reading. I hope all of our listeners are doing well and healthy, and I hope that if you are forced to spend some time alone and away from people, you can do it reading books.
Or listening to our show.
Yeah, even better. Podcasts and books are the perfect way to spend the time. Let's get into this episode. We periodically do articles on the blog that we call Unmaskings that are a little different from our normal straight-up book reviews. An unmasking article is where Eric and I become investigative reporters to expose an actual person behind a genre fiction pseudonym and tell the truth about who they were, why they were hiding behind a pen name, and discuss their body of work. Well, I recently found an old book, and when I started doing research on the person who actually wrote it, it took me quite down a rabbit hole I want to share with you. I'm going to share that story later in the podcast in a segment that I'm calling 99 Chicks. Eric's going to be reviewing a book called Stench of Poppies by Ivor Drummond, part of a series that that's been collecting dust on my shelf for years, so I'm dying to know what he thought of it. I'm going to be reviewing a 1957 suspense paperback called Killer in the House by Borden Deal. But first, I'm thinking, Eric, we should wrap up the month of March by discussing some of the best books this month that we reviewed on the site. So why don't you go first? Give some highlights of the books you enjoyed this month.
Okay, all right. So this month I read Louis L'Amour's Western called Sackett's Land from 1974. It was a really unique frontier tale because the author had been producing these books about the fictional Sackett family of American pioneers for a decade prior to this novel. These stories were typically set in the mid to late 1800s, but L'Amour decided it would be fun to write a book about the first Sackett generation to enter America. Sackett's Land was the first of 4 novels that explored the family's history from the late 1500s to early 1600s. Sackett's Land stars Barnabas Sackett in a sprawling epic adventure from England across the Atlantic into what is now known as Virginia. It had cannons, it had musket battles, sword fights. Man, this thing had pirates, Native Americans, and of course it had a beautiful woman. This book is really just absolutely perfect. Tom, I recommend it to everyone to try out. I also enjoyed a really good crime noir novel called The Captive by Norman Daniels. It was published by Avon in 1959. It starred this African big game hunter named Castle, and he returns back to New York City to say his final goodbyes to his terminally ill grandfather. After inheriting his grandfather's hotel franchise, he learns that the mob, the syndicate, has infiltrated every hotel with this booming prostitution business. Castle wants the mob and all these illegal affairs out of his hotels, but the mob won't go out that easily. So Daniels writes the novel as this really gritty, action-oriented crime noir. There's mob beatings, there's murder, there's gunplay, there's treachery. It was really just this remarkable novel, and I've pitched it to Lee Goldberg to release as a cheap digital novel for his cutting-edge publishing house. I hope it comes out because listeners really need to experience the same joy that I had with it. Again, that was The Captive by Norman Daniels. And, man, this month was just stacked with great books. I have so many to choose from, but I'd say maybe next would be, and last would be Jack Higgins' novel. It was originally called The Run to Morning. It was also released as The Bloody Passage. And get this, it was released under 3 different author names. It came out as Jack Higgins. It also came out under the name of Martin Fallon and also James Graham. Of course, all 3 of these names are actually Henry Patterson, who's the real author. The novel stars Oliver Grant as a Vietnam War vet that excelled in Southeast Asia in a specialty unit that freed captives from enemy strongholds. After the war, Grant, he goes into this lucrative business of freeing prisoners for rich clients. It's, of course, illegal, but a corrupt businessman named, I forgot to put down the guy's name, but a corrupt business guy requests Grant to free his stepson from a Libyan prison. Grant declines the mission, fearing the fierce dictatorship in Libya. But once Grant's sister is kidnapped and held hostage, Grant must accept and complete the mission. There's beautiful women, there's gunfights, there's nautical chases, and there's even some aerial fights along the way. Any Jack Higgins fan's going to know exactly what to expect. It was a really fun read. I recommend it. Again, it's The Run to Morning or Bloody Passage. Just take your pick on either one. Tom, how about you?
I think I can think of three books I really enjoyed in the month of March. And you can see all these reviews if you go back and look at the month of March on paperbackwarrior.com. First one I want to bring to your attention is I Like It Tough by James Howard. It's book 2 in the Steve Ashe series. This one's from 1955. This is one of those series that Lee Goldberg is reprinting with Cutting Edge Press. It's a direct sequel to the first book in the series, I'll Get You Yet, about an ex-boxer and an ex-reporter who wages a one-man war on the mafia. All the books in the series have been recently compiled into one volume called The Complete Ashe. And if you're a fan of Don Pendleton's Executioner books, I think you'd really like these as well. You should check those out on Amazon, and they're priced really cheaply. I also reviewed a book called Ladyfingers by Shepard Rifkin from 1969. Rifkin wrote a lot of westerns, including a pretty bad installment of the Slocum series of adult westerns. He also wrote a civil rights mystery novel called The Murderer Vine, released by Hard Case Crime. This book, however, is Ladyfingers. It's about an NYPD police detective who gets asked by the police commissioner to investigate a weird situation where the police commissioner has been receiving packages in the mail containing the sliced off fingers from a woman's hand.
Gross. He assigns this troubled narcotics officer named Sanchez to investigate it. It's this great novel because Sanchez is not a super cop at all. He makes a lot of mistakes along the way on his quest to solve the mystery and save what's left of this girl. You should check it out. The book's Ladyfingers by Shepard Rifkin. Finally, at the beginning of the month, I read an installment of the Nick Carter Killmaster series that I really enjoyed. It was book 181 in the series called The Decoy Hit. It was from 1983. It was actually written by Robert Randisi using the Nick Carter pseudonym. And the plot's pretty simple. Someone is killing Defense Intelligence Agency couriers and stealing the secret materials they're carrying. The agency turns to Nick Carter to go undercover as a DIA courier to attract the assassins and smoke them out. Randisi wrote the novel with short chapters and a lot of dialogue, so it really flies by. I enjoyed it a lot, and I want to read more of Randisi's installments in the series. As a public service, I'll let you know that Randisi wrote number 152, Pleasure Island, number 155, Chessmaster, 169, The Mendoza Manuscript, 173, The Greek Summit, 181, The Decoy Hit, and 184, Caribbean Coup. So I think those are my three highlights from March. Good. Well, these reviews are all available on our flagship site, paperbackwarrior.com, where we are reviewing 2 books a day, every day. Take a look there for more information, and support us by clicking the links at the bottom of each review to buy through our Amazon affiliate link. We get a piece of the action. It doesn't cost you anything extra. And I guess that's really all we have on those reviews. Let's go ahead and get into the feature, Tom.
Let's go. All right, Eric, I want to begin our feature with a musical interlude. I want you to listen to this song and let me know what you think.
Music?
Yeah, no, trust me. This is going somewhere, I promise. The song is called 99 Chicks. Check it out.
Well, I got 99 chicks, but they won't do. All I want is a girl by the name of 99 chicks, baby.
What do you think, Eric? You're dancing around my my studio here. You must be digging it.
It sounds like some good 1950s style rockabilly.
It is.
I hear those keyboards or the piano. Should say piano.
It's a good song, right?
Yeah, it's a really good song.
It's a good song. Sounds a little like Jerry Lee Lewis, right?
Yeah.
All right. So the artist who recorded 99 Chicks, which was a one-hit wonder, was Ron Haydock and the Boppers. And I want you to keep that in the back of your head because we're going to come back to why that's relevant in this story. And I'm sure you're wondering what the heck does this have to do with vintage paperbacks, right?
Yeah, that's where
I'm glad you asked. So a lot of our features here are designed to introduce you to authors that you should know more about. In recent episodes, we discussed Jerry Ahern, Bruno Fisher, Richard Deming, all guys that fans of our genre have probably heard of and now are experts on after they've listened to our show. Well, today I want to talk about an author that you've almost certainly never heard of, and his contribution to the genre was actually pretty minimal. But it's a cool story, and I hope you find it interesting. So for me, the story began when I bought a large lot of books in an eBay purchase. Along with the hard-boiled crime and adventure stuff, I got a bunch of ace doubles, and there were a couple sleaze novels with vintage crime fiction setups. One of them was this one. I'm going to hand this to you now, Eric. I want you to take a look at it and describe it for our reader, our listener, and give your first impressions. Tell them what the book is, everything about it.
So it's Beware the Deadly Lure of the Scarlet Virgin by Don Shepard, published by, it looks like an unknown publisher to me, Paragon News. And it looks like a standard romance novel And it looks like she's wearing a shower curtain.
That's about right. All right, so first thing to understand, and I think the actual title is just Scarlet Virgin by Don Shepard. Okay. The first thing to understand is that the paperback is an April 1962 printing by a low-end publisher called Pike Books of Van Nuys, California. It was distributed by Paragon News. The photo on the is the cover model. Not a particularly attractive woman in my opinion. What do you think? She good looking?
She looks like a 70s Jamie Lee Curtis, which I've never found attractive.
She looks like a heroin addict to me, but
Jamie Lee Curtis.
No, Jamie Lee Curtis is
Yes.
at that time was fantastic looking. I think you're doing Jamie Lee Curtis a disservice, and we'll put a picture of this up on the Facebook page. The photo of the cover model was taken by someone named Bob Pike, and again, it was published by Pike Books. I can only assume that Bob Pike was the owner of this less than prestigious publishing house, Pike Books, and I bet that snapping pictures for sexy paperbacks was probably his favorite perk of the job. The real interest here, however, is the author. As you may have gathered, the writer here is not, in fact, named Don Shepard. A bit of internet digging answered the question of the sleazy authorship mystery, who is Don Shepard? Now, according to U.S. copyright records, the real author was Chicago native Ron Haydock.
Ah, okay.
And if you're not familiar with that name, follow me and I'm going to get you up to speed. You can go on to Spotify or YouTube and listen to 99 Chicks by Ron Haydock and the Boppers. It's available online streaming. And I think it's a pretty awesome song. I like Rockabilly, though. The Rockabilly single was released as a 45 RPM in August 1959 by Cha-Cha Records. It wasn't much of a hit, but the disc remains a rarity sought after by collectors. The group, Ron Haydock and the Boppers, performed on a TV show called Chicago Bandstand before Haydock left the Windy City, his hometown, to chase fame in Hollywood. So Haydock is a guy that I think you and I would like. He was a lifelong fan of horror movies, and he began editing a column in a film buff magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland, published by Forrest J. Ackerman, before Haydock launched his own knockoff publication that ran from 1961 to 1964 called Famous Monsters of the Films. He also co-hosted a weekly Los Angeles talk radio show where he geeked out over horror films. Again, I think this is our kind of guy,
yes,
right? Because
I
if
wanna hang with this
podcasting
guy.
was around back then, he almost certainly would have had a wildly popular horror movie podcast.
Yes.
Anyway, so from that, I think he developed a knack for writing prose, which opened the door to his career as an author. So he wrote 2 sleaze novels for Bob Pike, published in March and April of 1962. One is called The Flesh Peddlers, and the other one, the one that we talked about here that I handed you, called The Scarlet Virgin. Both released under the pen name of Don Shepard. If he received the going rate at the time, it's likely that Mr. Pike paid Mr. Haydock about $500 per manuscript, maybe less. Over the subsequent 6 years, Haydock continued his career as a novelist, co-authoring 11 basically straight-up porno books under the name Vin Saxon, a pseudonym he shared with an author named Jim Harmon. His body of work from this era was kind of hilarious. It included a book called Caged Lust, a 1967 effort in which, if the cover is any indication, a zoo gorilla has carnal relations with at least 2 lusty babes. The novel was also released, Eric, under the name of Ape Rape.
Fitting.
Subtle. Haydock also acted in a handful of schlock cinema B-movies in the 1960s, including one called Rat Fink a Boo Boo from 1966 with a soundtrack featuring several of Haydock's songs. He co-authored the screenplay and acted in 2 different roles in the film, including one credited to Vin Saxon, one of his pseudonyms, the one he used for the gorilla porn novel. Anyway, so his dreams of Hollywood success eventually fade, and he returns to Chicago in 1967 to go back to work on his music career. He wrote some stories for Creepy Magazine, and he drafted the copy for the backs of a 55-unit trading card series issued by Topps in 1968 called Land of the Giants. And these cards actually fetch a pretty penny on the collector's market today. Haydock returns to acting in 1971 in a horror movie called Blood Shack, directed by his longtime friend and collaborator Ray Dennis Steckler. He continued to be part of the world of horror film fandom by serving as associate editor and writer in a short-lived publication called Monster of the Movies that came and went in 1974. I looked for quotes from Ron, and the only quote I could find from him was, quote, I'm out for kicks in life, doing whatever I want, whenever I want. On the move like there's no tomorrow. I'm living like there's only today. Yeah, that's the right word for it, what I wanted out of life. Kicks. And I never had to look very far or very hard to find them. Somehow, they always managed to find me.
Right on, man.
Yeah. So the details aren't entirely clear, Eric, but in 1977, it was a bad year for the author, actor, musician, and film fan. He'd been visiting his friend, filmmaker Steckler, in Las Vegas and was in the process of hitchhiking on his way to Los Angeles. Word is that his mental health had been slipping and he was suffering from depression that year. So on August 14, 1977, he was walking down an interstate highway exit ramp in San Bernardino County, California, when he was struck and killed by an 18-wheeler truck.
That's horrific.
Yeah, no, it's awful. He died 2 days before Elvis Presley met his own too soon demise. Haydock was 37 at the time of his death. Presley was 42, and their funerals were on the same day. So Haydock is currently buried in Resurrection Catholic Cemetery near Midway Airport on Chicago's South Side. In 1996, Norton Records compiled 28 of Haydock's songs and demos previously released and unreleased into this career retrospective CD called 99 Chicks, which is his hit and the song that I played for you. The 29-track compilation remains available today on Spotify, which is where I heard it. However, his literature, his books, have really remained lost to the ages. That is until this deep discount eBay paperback lot brought The Scarlet Virgin by Don Shepard into my library and into my life. So I read the book.
How is it?
All right, so it's a 158-page, big font paperback. It's narrated by Biff Elliott, who's a 34-year-old knight of the world who was a freelance soldier in the Cuban Revolution and experienced wild times in the Orient. It's not a good book. This feature would be so much better if this book was a lost masterpiece, and I found this rockabilly star.
I was hoping it was going to be great.
I know. But bear with me. There's a silver lining, I think. So as the novel opens, the Biff character finds himself held at gunpoint by a sexy redhead who's convinced he's someone else. One thing leads to another, and Biff is thrust into this fantastic adventure involving a primitive society who worships a megalomaniac white man as their god, and a missing idol that can unravel the whole enterprise. The short novel's full of kinky nymphs for Biff to boff along the way. Again, it would be so much better if this was great, but it's just not the case. It wasn't that good. Haydock's writing is fairly amateurish and in desperate need of an editor. The narration is littered with sentence fragments and exclamation points as an indicator that something exciting is happening. I hate it when authors do that. I think he was really trying to emulate Doc Savage in that style of adventure, but the whole thing felt kind of rushed and poorly outlined. But I have a different spin on it, other than just being a crappy book. Here's what I could say about it. It could have been a good first draft of a novel if it was in the hands of the right publisher and the right editor. But it was clear that Pike Books really didn't care enough about their readers and producing a quality product to take the time to spruce this thing up or hire an editor or have Bob Pike do it. He's too busy taking pictures of models for the cover. And so Ron Haydock, in my mind, deserved better. I mean, the guy, he wrote he's written at least one more book than I have, and I think it was a first draft that, again, if he had some tender loving care and someone to kind of shepherd him through the book, it could have been a fun Doc Savage like book instead of reading like a crappy first draft, which I think is what it is.
Yeah.
The biggest upside of this forgotten book is that it prompted me to learn a little bit about this ambitious young man who really did want to make it bigger in the arts than he ever did, and before his life was cut short. And I think back to his quote, and all he wanted out of life were kicks, and I just hope he found some along the way. So that's it. I don't know if our listeners are going to find this interesting, but it just seems like kind of an interesting guy. Even if his book wasn't that great and his body of work is something that doesn't really need to be remembered, just sort of an interesting character that I think if he were around at the same time as you and I, we would have found a lot in common with him.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like he spoke to you.
Yeah, I mean, his life spoke to me more than his book. I can't recommend that people go out and seek The Scarlet Virgin by Don Shepard, but knowing a little bit about this guy was interesting to me.
I thought it was cool. I thought it was interesting as well.
All right, cool. That's it. So why don't you do your book review?
All right. So this week I'm doing a spy novel called The Stench of Poppies. What a crazy title. It was published by Pyramid in 1978, and the author on the cover is Ivor Drummond. And a quick peek online reveals that Drummond is actually a guy named Roger Erskine Longrig. He authored novels for a number of different genres, including historical stuff, romance books, mystery, and espionage. But under the name Frank Parrish, Longrig wrote an 8-book series starring a poacher and thief named Dan Mallet. Tom, have you ever read any Dan Mallet books?
I haven't, but they sound kind of neat. I sort of like the idea of a series starring a poacher.
Okay. As Laura Black, Longrig authored a number of Scottish historical novels. In reviewing Longrig's rather robust literary catalog, the novels that interest me the most are the spy fiction ones that he wrote under this name of Ivor Drummond. So I chose the first one that I touched on your bookshelf, the oddly titled Stench of Poppies. This is actually part of a series that is sometimes called the Jenny Norrington series, although I can't find where there's an actual name for the series. Drummond's 9 novels star 3 wealthy individuals who simply fight crime together. There's no other reason that I can find to have them together other than they just share wealth. While the team's creation isn't really fully explained, these books are of the spy or espionage variety. The trio is led by Jenny Norrington. She's this beautiful British woman, and she's a wealthy heiress. Her co-members are a rich Texan named Colorado Tucker. He goes by Collie. And this brute named Count Alessandro di Gonzarello. Thankfully, his name is just Sandro in the book. That's what they call him. The series was launched in 1969 with The Man with a Tiny Head. The first 5 novels were published by Pyramid, with the rest of the series published by Dell. This book begins within a laboratory as a Turkish scientist has mistakenly discovered a method of making a deadlier strain of heroin. By attempting to maximize the growth of poppy seeds, they basically wanted to use less land to create more morphine and more legal heroin. The scientist modifies these poppy seeds. In doing so, he makes a super version that makes the morphine or heroin user a raving, suicidal maniac within minutes of its use. Tom, have you seen the movies 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later?
I love those movies. In fact, I just saw the first one with my son. I was kind of giving him an education on my history of zombie fiction because he's a big fan of The Walking Dead.
Oh, okay. All right. So think of those, the people in those books that are just kind of raving lunatics going crazy. They're not zombies, but they're infected.
Yeah, it's like they call it the rage. In the movies.
Rage. Yeah. That's what these poppy seeds do to these people. So they go crazy, they go raving mad, and the idea is that these poppy seeds can be grown and sold to governments who want to cleanse their streets and neighborhoods of heroin junkies. So you put the bad heroin out there, let them all go nuts, they kill themselves within a matter of minutes, problem solved.
I have a moral issue with that, but as a public policy, it's probably very economical.
Right. So by providing this deadly drug, they feel that their drug epidemic will correct itself through mass suicide among users and addicts. But Jenny, Collie, and Sandro meet with a high-level bank administrator who wants the trio to investigate this Turkish carpet retailer, Mustafa Algan, who's making large deposits in various currencies. The author shares with readers the fact that Algan has inherited a distribution duty for these new modified forms of heroin and morphine. So it's up to the trio to learn what the reader already knows, which is Algan and his rather robust distribution scale of putting out these bad poppy seeds and bad heroin and bad morphine. At 224 pages, I was really hoping for this really tight procedural investigation that would eventually lead to gunplay, high adventure, or some sexy undercover romps with this Jenny girl. Unfortunately, the Stench of Poppies never really gained much traction. The author just goes through dozens of cities for his 3 protagonists to explore, and they just go on and on and on, and I was just begging that they would find a freaking poppy field just so I could stop counting pages. Now, I understand that these books are actually really, really good. Spy Guys and Gals has great reviews for this whole series, so I'm not going to really dismiss it based on just this one volume, but reading a book about 3 characters just driving around looking for poppy fields was really boring to me. It did nothing for me, but I'm going to keep trying other installments. I think you've got 2 or 3 on your shelf that I can still explore.
I got one called The Tank of Sacred Eels and The Necklace of Skulls. Ivor Drummond really had a knack for titles.
Yeah, he really did. Yeah.
And the covers are beautiful. The covers make you want to read them.
Yeah, it's got great covers. So
All right, so you're going to give it another shot?
Yeah, because I don't have to invest anything.
Right, because I own them.
You already did it.
All right, so the investment's mine, the pleasure's yours.
Exactly. So again, that was Stench of Poppies by Ivor Drummond, and these are fairly common. I've seen them out in the wild, so you should be able to get a copy as well.
Yeah.
But let us know what you think if you end up getting one.
I think those might have been released as ebooks too, maybe even under the author's actual name. So people can follow up on that too. I think they were somewhat expensive for ebooks. Ebooks should only be a couple bucks. I remember them being outrageously expensive, but I may have that wrong. I'm going to review a book called Killer in the House by Borden Deal. Borden Deal lived from 1922 to 1985. He was born in Mississippi. He died in Florida. Between those two events, he attended University of Alabama and wrote 21 books under his own name and pseudonyms, including Loisy Deal, Lee Borden, Leigh Borden, and Michael Sunga. Most of his work was mainstream fiction depicting the New South, but he delved into the world of crime fiction in a 1957 Signet paperback originally titled Killer in the House. Paul and Karen are a married couple. They're very much in love. They're living in a rural life with their young daughter, and their world gets turned upside down by an unexpected house guest. The guest is a fresh-out-of-prison guy named Sid, and while Paul greets him warmly, Paul is not excited to see his old friend. You see, Paul has a checkered past, Eric. It involves a period of incarceration and a successful parole. He's been honest with Karen about his criminal history. He's a new man now, one with a job, a house, a daughter. While he was in prison, Sid helped Paul to survive one day at a time without going nuts or getting killed during Paul's decade behind bars. So by anyone's estimation, Paul owes Sid a big favor. But now Sid is back in Paul's life to collect. As you can imagine, Paul's wife is not thrilled about Paul's prison mentor staying in their house for any amount of time, but Paul insists, and here we are. It doesn't take long before Sid pitches Paul on an opportunity to partake in a heist with a sizable payday. If Paul does it, he can provide for his family, and Sid can skate off to Mexico to live comfortably forever. Of course, Paul wants to straight up and fly right, but Sid is a menacing fellow who can be quite persuasive. As the novel progresses, different secrets are revealed that I'm not going to spoil for you here that make it harder for Paul to decline Sid's offer. It's more of a slow burn novel. There is a double-barreled climactic ending, but there's not much action throughout the paperback. But man, there was a lot of tension and suspense. It really runs thick. There was a really good subplot about a parole officer who believes in Paul's ability to become a productive member of society. You need to suspend your disbelief on some of the law enforcement scenes, but it's fiction, so you should be able to do that. I thought Killer in the House by Borden Deal was a terrific suspense thriller, and the author does a really admirable job of turning up the heat slowly. These have these two strong characters locked in this test of wills, and it made for an extremely tense page-turner. If you like crime novels with a sizable dose of moral dilemma, you're going to love this one too. And here's a fun fact. My Hollywood sources, by the name of Lee Goldberg, I should leave his name on it, it rhymes with Shmi Schmolberg, informed me that Borden Deal's Killer in the House was adapted into a TV episode of the Dick Powell Theater that aired on October 10, 1961. It was episode 3 of the first season. It starred Earl Holliman and Edmund O'Brien as the two jailbirds. The TV script changed the characters into brothers. I went onto YouTube to see if I could find that episode, and they had episodes of Dick Powell Theater, but I couldn't find this particular one. But
Gotcha.
The name of the book is Killer in the House, and the author is Borden Deal, and I highly, highly recommend it.
Great. All right, before we go, I'm going to do a quick shout-out to my wife, Sarah, for adding a special book to my bookshelf. Apparently, there's a website out there called lovebookonline.com, Tom.
Never heard of it.
Okay. So you can make your own personalized book and give it to your significant other.
It's like a vanity publisher? Like I could write it?
Yes. The book is sort of like a comic strip, and you can create dialogue for the characters that you want to personally say to your loved one.
You don't have to draw the pictures. They provide you the template?
They provide the pictures.
Oh, that's kind of nice.
You have these little dialogue bubbles. So we talk about paperbacks here, Tom. It's a paperback. I really loved my copy. It was very generous of her. This isn't an advertisement or anything like that. Shout out for a book gift you can provide to someone important in your life. And that's a wrap.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Paperback Warrior podcast. We'll be back next Monday. Visit us at paperbackwarrior.com for reviews every day. And tell a friend if you think this is something they might enjoy. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.